Good evening. Welcome to Robert Sungenis Live. As you know, this program is set aside for you to take your questions and comments on any topic whatsoever. And I, as my role as host of this program, will endeavor to answer your questions to the best of my ability using our Catholic faith, the scripture, the tradition, the fathers, the medievals, the popes, the councils, the saints, the doctors, and just about anything I can find to help you walk away satisfied that your question has indeed been answered. We come to you every week on Wednesday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., unless something comes up. And usually at the top of the program, I have a topic I want to cover, but no topics tonight. I'm just going to take your questions and get through as many of them as possible. The only thing I want to alert you to is that next week, when we have our program, I will have a special guest, and his name is E. Michael Jones. And when we have him come on the program, I'm going to find out what the E stands for. But usually we call him Michael Jones or just Mike Jones. And the reason he's going to be on the program is because he just wrote a book called The Dangers of Beauty, an intriguing title. And he asked me to write a review of his book, which I did and completed and sent it to him. And that will be in one of the upcoming issues of the magazine Culture Wars. If you are familiar with that magazine, if not, you should be, because I can definitely say you're missing something if you don't subscribe to it. Michael is one of the most intelligent men that I know of in my lifetime. There's a lot of intelligent men out there, but one especially is E. Michael Jones, because not only is he intelligent, he can reason very well. And in that gift that he has from God, he can, what they say, connect the dots in an uncanny way that after you read his material, you will understand life in its deepest sense that we're privileged to understand it with our limited, finite minds in this life. But he is one of the best, probably the best that I have ever run into in my life. And so I am privileged to have him as a guest next week. And we'll be discussing his book, 450 pages of a double column, 10-point font writing, but it has a lot of pictures. And that's one thing we're going to be focusing on when we do have him as a guest. I'm going to be bringing about 24 paintings from history, the greats like Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Peter Paul Rubens, you name it, and some of the Gothic and Romanesque artists like Giotto, and before that, we're going to have a whole panorama of paintings, and Michael's going to analyze them for us and tell us the deep secrets in all these paintings that you have missed for all these years. And we're dying to know what they're all about. And we'll include, the modern artists like Picasso and Mondrian and, oh gosh, there's, Jason Pollock and Andy Warhol and all those guys. And not only paintings, but we Michael analyzes music and literature, poetry, and I throw a couple of things in my review about fashion, how we can know where we're headed when we look at fashion, and things of that nature. So we're going to just give you a whole bird's eye view of the world and interpret it for you so that you can see what these men are really saying, where they're coming from, and where they want to bring you. And sometimes it's not a very good place they want to bring you. So thank God for people like Michael Jones to put up the warning signs for us, as they say. So just want to let you know, we're going to have, a good time with Michael. Hopefully he can stay for the whole 2 hours. If he just wants to stay for an hour, we could get a lot done. But if he wants to stay for the 2 hours, we'll let him go. And you guys could even ask questions on the chat room, and I'll pick them up and I'll ask Michael them. So we're all going to have a good time. So there we go. It's once in a lifetime that you'll get this. So tell all your friends and neighbors and bring them all aboard and have them learn the same thing. We all need this. Okay, so I'm going to start right in with the questions tonight. All right, so a question from Manny says, did you ever get to see the show Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch? If so, what do you think of the phenomena and the scientific data being observed there? I did take a look at that, if I remember, but that was a couple of weeks ago, Manny, so I'm not quite up to snuff on commenting on what I saw. I believe, if I remember correctly, it had something to do with extraterrestrial phenomenon and stuff associated with that. As I said a couple of weeks ago, I did write a review of Paul Thigpen's new book called Extraterrestrials and the Catholic Faith. And although it was a good book to read, I mean, because it's 400 and some odd pages, half of the book is the history of thoughts on extraterrestrials. You think we're the only ones talking about it? It stretches back to the time of the Greeks and through the first millennium and the second millennium, and especially after the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, things started to really pick up about extraterrestrials. And as a matter of fact, in my review, I put the names down of all the people who had written about extraterrestrials from the time of the Greeks all the way to the present time. And I think I had a list that Paul Thigpen put in his book of, let me see, about 75, 80 people. Okay. So it's been quite a topic throughout history. And I put in the review what they thought about it, whether they didn't think extraterrestrials were possible, or if they thought it was possible. And even in that category, people may have thought it was possible because God can do what he wants, of course, but didn't think God did it. Okay. And actually, when you categorize it that way, it happens that there were more people who believed in the possibility of aliens than didn't believe. Okay. So, and I think Paul was pretty proud of that fact in writing his book, because he takes a very positive view that there are aliens out there and that, they need to be saved and blah, blah, blah. It gets into a whole lot of circumlocution, and that's where I think Paul falls off the edge. People are going to speculate about extraterrestrials all the time. But one of the major facts I found, and this includes Skinwalker Ranch. Was it Skywalker Ranch or Skinwalker Ranch? I don't recognize Skinwalker. At any rate, 95% of alien phenomenon, or ETIs as they call them, extraterrestrial intelligence, or UFOs, and then there's another term they use, unidentified aerial phenomena. So UAPs is now the adjoining term. 95% of them can be explained by either weather mechanisms or military projects or things of that nature, or something terrestrial. And the larger categories of that are weather objects, or where they test the weather and all things like that, and military, of course. So that leaves 5%. So the 5%, now you have to speculate, okay, where could they, if they can't explain that, and believe me, they try to explain them, but if they can't, then what's the next best option? Well, I think this is where the weakness in Paul's book comes out, because he doesn't spend much time discussing it. He just sort of mentions it in passing, and that's the demonic world. And I take him to task on that in the review. And so that's where that's going, and that can surely explain the other 5%, because we know demonic activity is real in this world. It comes in various degrees. Some of it is very subtle. Some of it is very obvious, and everywhere in between. But that is a phenomenon in this world, and they can transform matter. There's no problem in them, making a spaceship or making something look like an alien, and even communicating with a human being. That's all very possible. I mean, if we look at the record in the Bible about what demons can do, I mean, the magicians in Pharaoh's court copied at least 3 of the miracles that Moses did. Okay. They made rods dance like snakes, and they looked like snakes, acted like snakes, just like Moses' snakes, except Moses was greater because his snake ate their snakes. Okay, but the fact is, they can engage in this preternatural power that gives them the ability to transform things that are already created. They can't create things, of course, because that would be supernatural. But so we know from scripture that these things can be made to deceive us, and that's the job of the demons, is to deceive us. And my last question in the book was, if all these reports about alien invasions and blah, blah, blah is true, because people give reports of talking to them and being examined by them and all this kind of stuff. And of course, you have to find out whether that's true or not. And even if it were true, now I lost my train of thought. Even if it were true, you have to ask, what is the possibility that some aliens came from some planet somewhere out in outer space, of which we have found none, no evidence whatsoever. And if they're so advanced that they can travel beyond the speed of light, that Paul Thigpen even says that they can do, because he doesn't trust the reasonings of modern physics that limit speed to the speed of light. He says that in the book. So if they're that far advanced, then the obvious question is, why haven't they taken us over? Why are they playing cat and mouse games with us, and just use their advanced knowledge to just, call an end to this and take over the planet? If, as Paul suggests, they want the resources of our planet, which sounds like something from, Star Trek. So it doesn't make sense to me that you would have this advanced culture that can travel like we've never seen before from outer space, and they do nothing except taunt us, appear here and then escape, and appear there and then whisk away. And, what's that all for? I mean, are they giving us some kind of circus entertainment in the sky? Is that their purpose? Well, it seems to be, because they do nothing else. So the whole thing just doesn't make sense. And of course, there's a lot more to it all, but and the other thing is, you get into, and Paul gets into this after the second in the second part of his book. The first part is basically the history. Second part is basically Paul trying to defend the idea that aliens exist. And if they exist, of course, they're part of the creation. So that means they're under the curse of sin and death. And now you have to start dividing. Well, did they really sin? And does Adam's sin affect them? And are they a separate creation? If they are part of it and they are under sin and death and they need a redeemer, and how's that going to happen? Well, then Paul starts talking about having multiple Marys and multiple Christs, with Christ having a hypostasis of an alien body alongside his human body. So you're getting into some pretty thick wickets here, and theologically, it does not hold together. And that's a major part of his book. So the book, or the review, is going to be published in the November issue of Culture Wars. It's about let me see, how many pages is it? 15-page review, because I go into pretty much all of the ideas that he is trying to display in the book that he believes exonerates his position. So I take a dim view of the book, because even though it's a valiant effort that he put in, probably the best effort that I've seen, it falls very short of even turning my head the other way and saying, okay, maybe it's a possibility. After reading the book, I was more convinced that it wasn't a possibility than I was before I read the book. So, and this is Paul Thigpen is no slouch. He's a good scholar, good writer, and even he couldn't, convince a skeptic like me. So you'll find out when you read the review. But so Manny, I don't take. Let's put it this way: I take a dim view of anybody trying to defend the idea that there's aliens out there on other planets. Okay. It just does not add up to me. Okay. And you'll see all the reasons when you read the review. As a matter of fact, when it's published, then I'll put it up on our website so everybody can read it and find out what my thoughts are on it. Okay. Question: did you watch the Peter Dimond debate in Pints with Aquinas? If you do, what do you think? Apparently Dimond destroyed his interlocutor. No, I did not see that. Did not know about that one. In case these things come up, Germanicus, just send me an email. Let me know that this debate's going to happen on Pints with Aquinas, because I've seen the show. Who's the guy's name that runs it, the host? I forget his name. But he does a good job. He's very good at what he does. So it's a good show. And so I'd like to know who his interlocutor was, and I'd like to know what the topic was. And if you can give me a URL for the debate, I'd like to watch it myself, and then the next time, after next week's show, I can give some comments on it. So if you would be so kind as to send me an email at sungenis@aol.com. Okay. All right. So Mike K. Vine has a question. James White said that if Abraham was justified in Genesis 22, it would undermine Paul's point that Abraham was justified before circumcision, but Genesis 22 is after. Your response? I'm surprised James White would give such a I don't know what adjective to use here. I mean, that's just ridiculous. I mean, yes, Paul's point is that Abraham's justified to the in Romans 4, he's using that argument that Abraham is justified before circumcision, because that's the point he has to get across to the Jews. So, of all the times that Abraham was justified, that Scripture either implies or says explicitly, and they would be Genesis 12, Genesis 15, and Genesis 22. Paul has his pick of which one he wants to use. And since the Jews were touting circumcision as their ticket to heaven, Paul says, wait a minute. Did you realize that one of Abraham's justifications that came in Genesis 15 was before he got circumcised? And he was a justified man. So obviously, your argument about circumcision being your ticket to heaven ain't going to work. Okay. But of course, James White has trouble with his named after epistle, the Epistle of James. He just doesn't like what James has to say. But James is very clear, St. James is very clear that Abraham was justified in Genesis 22, and he uses Genesis 15 as a comparison justification. Okay? James chapter 2 references Genesis 15 as a justification, and then says, well, you know something else? Abraham was justified in Genesis 22. Okay, so James is equating the two justifications as real justifications. Okay, James White doesn't like that. And so he's going to try to make this excuse here that, well, there's only one justification that Paul points out in Romans 4. Yeah, because it's Romans 4. It's a topic or a context that needs that argument that Abraham's justification came before circumcision. But James 2 is a different context. And so in that context, we're going to talk about another justification of Abraham that happened in Genesis 22, because that clearly was a work by taking Isaac up to the mountain, going to sacrifice him. The angel stops him, but of course, that's a work. Okay. In Genesis 15, we have a justification that comes because of his faith. Because you believed, Abraham, you're justified. Okay. So these things about these two aspects of justification, faith and works, are constantly being interwoven in and out of Abraham's life. And at each point, whether it's a faith that believes God, or a work that shows that he loves God and is going to be obedient to God, they're all justifications. And this is how the Catholic faith teaches justification. This is why the Catholic faith says that justification is a progressive justification. It starts with baptism, and then it grows and it grows and it grows. As your faith gets stronger, your works get stronger, and basically you show that your justified position before God is indeed correct, and you're only expanding on that as you work it out in life. You have increasing faith, you have increasing works, and this all has a terminal point at the end of time, of course, and God will reward us with our eternal reward for all that progression of faith and works. But every time the Protestants try to cut the two and say that, well, it's only faith and, works just sort of comes after, like it's this concept they have that once you have the faith, then works are going to just come automatically, like a conveyor belt. Once you press the switch, the works just come off the conveyor belt automatically. Well, that is a totally wrong idea. And that's why James goes into the whole idea that, hey, even the devils believe, but you don't see their conveyor belt of works coming off one at a time, do you? No. Okay. So you can have all the faith in the world, but never produce one work. And that's not going to be sufficient in order to gain eternal life. Okay. When Abraham took Isaac up to the mountain, do you think that was just a sort of a, yeah, no problem, God? Yeah, I can walk up the mountain, kill my son, and, you know, go from there, whatever you want me to do. Do you think he didn't have a problem with the fact that God was asking him to go kill his son as a sacrifice? No. So that was something hard, difficult for him to do. It didn't come automatically like, yeah, no problem. Okay. This is something he had to struggle with. As a matter of fact, he might have wondered, who's talking to me? Is it the devil or is it God? Because only the devil would tell me to kill somebody. Okay. Well, now we know how that all was resolved. God was just testing him, and he had no intentions of him killing his son. So, but that was a hard thing. And the same thing is true when James starts talking about the man who was lying there in the street without clothes and without food. Does it come automatically to us that, yeah, we're going to spend money to clothe him and we're going to spend money to feed him and take him to our home and make sure he's okay, like the Good Samaritan and all this stuff? Does it come real easy, or do we have to put some effort into it? Do we have to decide, well, can I do this? You know, most good people will say, yeah, okay, weighing all the odds, this is the best thing to do, even though I'm going to suffer or lose this or lose that, or people might not think highly of me, or who knows what they're going to think. But it's not something that comes automatically. You have to put effort into it, and a decision has to be made to actually use your hands and feet. Okay. That's the difference between faith and works. Faith is something where you believe. I believe in you, God, but there's no work involved because it's just neurons and synapses in your brain and your soul working together saying, I believe in God. Okay. But the guy in James 2 comes back and says, well, you say you have faith. Well, I'll show you my faith by my works. Why does he do that? Because when someone says, I believe in God, well, we don't know whether he really believes in God or not, because you can say anything you want. It's easy to do that, okay? But it's not so easy to do a work. And so if you work and you put clothes on that naked man and you feed him, well, that shows me, yeah, you really do believe in God, because that's your whole motive for helping this man, because you believe in God, okay? So the Protestants make the mistake of saying, well, those works are just going to come naturally if I have good faith. No, there's a lot of people with good faith who wouldn't even lend a finger to that man on the street. Okay. A lot of people who go to church on Sunday and I believe in God and sing all the hymns, but they would think twice about helping that man on the street. Okay. So the works don't automatically come from the faith. You have to work at it. Speaking of works. And that's the difference. Okay. So, that's why the Protestant understanding of justification is just full of theological errors, full of them. Okay. I don't know how it ever survived. Well, of course, we've all seen the repercussions of this erroneous idea of justification because they all believe something different. All the denominations, okay, they can't even agree amongst themselves, whether sanctification is separate from justification or they're combined together, or what regeneration is, whether your faith precedes regeneration or regeneration precedes faith. They just, it depends on what denomination. You're going to hear something different. Okay. I've been through it all. And I wrote a nice long book if you want to see all the ins and outs of it. It's called Not by Faith Alone. 775 pages of everything you wanted to know about this, but were afraid to ask. And I'll tell you in the book where it's all coming from, how it originated, who's saying it, why they're saying it, and why they think they have the answer and the Catholic Church was wrong. Okay. So it's all there for you. You can get it on our website, robertsongenis.org, called Not by Faith Alone. You can get it in paperback or hardback or even in PDF. So I suggest you take a look at that. All right, next question. Did Christ spend his biblical missing years 13 to 30 in India studying the Vedas and Buddhism? Early Gnosticism Christianity did seem to flourish up to 400 AD and is very Eastern centric. The answer to that, Richard, is no, no, no. Okay. These are some of the wild stories you get from, pseudepigraphal literature or apocryphal literature around that time. There's all kinds of stories about Jesus. There's about 200 different pseudepigraphal and apocryphal books. You can get all kinds of stories about Jesus. Like one of my favorites is, Jesus turning somebody into a frog, one of his playmates, because his playmate did something against him. So don't believe a word of it. Okay. All right. Okay. Question from John Fradd. I heard that quantum entanglement reacts faster than the speed of light. Wouldn't this prove that relativity is incorrect, since Einstein's relativity theory set the speed of light as the speed limit of the universe? Welcome to the critical world of physics there, John. Yes, it would indeed disprove Einstein's special relativity theory. Okay. Now, you got to remember, though, okay, and you won't hear this a lot from the open society out there in the halls of academia, that Einstein changed his mind about the speed of light. Okay. It was the special theory only that the speed of light was limited to 186,000 miles per second, or 300,000 kilometers per second. Okay. When general relativity came along 10 years later, Einstein said the speed of light is not limited to 186,000 miles per second. And let's just use that fact and put it right in the ballpark of the Big Bangers. Okay, we'll get to quantum entanglement in a second. The Big Bangers, as much as they wanted the Big Bang, okay, had a problem. And that was, if the expansion or the explosion, whatever you want to call it, is limited to 186,000 miles a second, then we're not going to get the universe we have today. Okay, because it's going to move too slow. And here's the further problem. As soon as that thing starts expanding, and you're saying that light and gravity are limited to 186,000 miles a second, well, how's one side of the explosion going to know what the other side is doing? Because after the first second, they're more than 186,000 miles apart. Okay, and it just grows. What do they? It grows geometrically after that. Okay, so they got a big problem with the Big Bang. So how do they solve it? Well, somebody in the 1980s named Alan Guth from MIT had a dream one night and said, "Whoa, here's how it happens. It's called inflation." Now, inflation is probably a misnomer, because when you think of inflation, you're thinking of pumping up your, bicycle tire and you're inflating it, but that takes time, right? Okay. You're pumping up a car tire, that takes time. You're pumping up a toy plastic puppet, it takes time. Okay. So, well, we don't have all the time. So here's what we do. Einstein's general relativity allows us to say that the inflation basically happened in such a short time that you can't even imagine it. And so and they've changed the numbers on this, by the way, but now it is in 10 to the minus 35 seconds, the universe exploded 10 to the 26 times its size. Now, you know what 10 to the 26 is? That's 1 followed by 26 zeros. Okay. That's like in the, what? Is that septillion, octillion, nonillion? I forget which one it is. That's big. Okay. So, and 10 to the minus 35 seconds, you know how short of a time? It's like it almost doesn't exist. Okay. 10 to the minus 35 is 1 followed by 35 zeros. Or, 0.1 followed by 35 zeros. Okay. So, yeah, it's, and they have to have this. Why? Because they have to have a basic size for the universe. If after it, it's still going to expand for 13 billion years and get to the size that they believe it is today, which is 93 billion light years in diameter. Okay. So what did they do? Well, they avoided Einstein's special relativity and they went right to general relativity that allows the speed of light and gravity to be any speed. Okay. And speaking of that, they do the same thing with the expanding universe today. They say because they found the supernovas that are used as time candlesticks that the universe is accelerating now. Okay. Way faster than the speed of light, 4 times the speed of light. Oh, really? So how do you figure that? Well, you go to general relativity again. That allows things to expand faster than the speed of light. That's how you do it. But you don't tell the public that. Okay. And whenever the topic comes up, you don't want to deny Einstein's special theory that says light speed was limited to 186,000 miles. So you'll continue to use that. And the heck with the public who's befuddled. Well, how can it expand at the beginning faster than the speed of light, and now at the end it's going faster than the speed of light? Well, they don't tell you that they're using general relativity. Okay, you only find that out when you go deep into the physics books. Okay, and you actually talk to the physicists. How can this be? Well, they do the old switcheroo. Okay, special relativity really doesn't work anywhere. Because you have to have an inertial frame of reference in order for special relativity to even be applicable. But there are none in the universe. Do you know any places in the universe that don't have gravity and don't have inertial forces? There are none. So how is special relativity going to apply? And the reason they have this problem is because you have to know the history. Einstein invented special relativity for one reason and one reason only. And that, which made the speed of light constant. Okay. And that was because all these experiments that were done in the 1800s that showed the Earth was fixed in space and wasn't moving, they couldn't answer. Until 25 years later, Einstein comes along and says, well, let's take away the ether, and that will allow us to make the speed of light constant, and therefore we can say it's the speed of light that is constant, not the Earth. Okay, now I don't want to go to explaining all that. I just want you to take what I said. He had 2 choices. Either we make the speed of light constant or we make the Earth constant. That is not moving. One or the other. That's the only 2 options we had. Okay? And what do you think this man of the world is going to choose? You think he's going to side with the Pope against Galileo and say, yeah, of course. Here it is. The Earth isn't moving. Where were we all these years? You think he's going to say that? Are you kidding? This guy hated the Catholic Church. Albert Einstein. Okay? His wife and their children converted to the Catholic Church, but not him. This guy was a serial adulterer, deep, deep in sin, and had no intentions of bowing to the Catholic Church. And so what option do you think he was going to choose? Yeah, we'll make the speed of light constant. And that worked for a while, for about 10 years, until he found out, uh-oh, it ain't working right. Because once we add in gravity and inertial forces, the whole thing changes. And in that realm, Einstein then had to say, okay, speed of light isn't constant. Okay. And you know what else? He took back the ether that he had eliminated in the special theory of relativity. How do you like them apples? So this whole thing is just full of contradictions. Okay. So no wonder they have another contradiction called quantum entanglement. Okay. Where an electron here communicates somehow with an electron that's millions of light years away. Okay. And how does that happen? Okay. So they have another anomaly to answer. This is another reason why special relativity doesn't engage with quantum entanglement or quantum mechanics. Okay. For that matter, general relativity has its problems too, but at least it's closer to quantum entanglement than special relativity could ever be. Okay. So yeah, it's all full of contradictions there, John. Okay. The safest place to be is an Earth that doesn't move, because we can answer all the questions that these guys are having. We don't need a big bang because we have a universe that rotates. Okay. We don't have any problem with the rotation curve of spiral galaxies, because, Newton's F equals ma doesn't fit those galaxies, but we can answer it because we have the angular momentum of the universe that's rotating to compensate for that. Okay. So, and that's just two. There's dozens of questions that we can answer from the geocentric viewpoint that they can't from their Big Bang special relativity, little box that they've put themselves in. And science is going nowhere. It's going nowhere. All they're doing now is gathering data, but nobody knows how to put the data points together to connect the dots, as I often say. And that's the key. Okay. Who can interpret all the data to give us a coherent understanding of the universe? They don't even come close. Okay. All right. Let's move on. Question: what does the Bible say about time travel? What's the Catholic position on time travel? Do you believe it's possible? Tesla knowledge. Time travel is not possible. It's just a figment of our imagination. It all comes from the time dilation concept that Einstein introduced with his special relativity theory. Okay. Now I'm going to have to tell you the history of that, because you need to know it. Okay. So when all these experiments were being done in the 1800s that showed the Earth was fixed in space, okay, as I said, Einstein came along and said, well, we'll make the speed of light constant, okay, in order to answer this question. That will allow the Earth to move, okay, because remember, he had two choices: either the Earth is fixed or the speed of light is fixed. And he chose the speed of light. Okay, so but then what happens when you choose the speed of light as fixed or constant? Okay, what happens? Well, here's what you have to do. You have to say that somehow the experimental equipment that was used to measure whether the Earth moves or not was faulty. Faulty in the sense that as soon as it moves, it's going to be compressed. It's going to be shortened in its length. Okay. Now, the experimental device that was used in the Michelson-Morley experiment had these long arms, and they were perpendicular to each other. Okay, like this. Okay, like that. So this arm was going in the direction that they thought the Earth was moving. This one wasn't. So this was used as a control, and this one was used to measure. Okay. Now, what did it measure? Well, it measured that the Earth was fixed. It wasn't moving through the ether. So that means the Earth wasn't revolving around the sun. Okay. And they did this over and over again and kept finding the same results. Okay. Earth wasn't moving. So the way you deal with this as a modern physicist is to say speed of light is constant. Is this, if the speed of light is constant, then that means the length of the arm had to shorten. Okay. Had to shorten because you have to answer. I mean, you just can't say the speed of light is constant. You have to show how that's going to affect the experimental apparatus and the whole experiment altogether. And the only thing that they could agree upon was, yeah, well, the length of this arm that is shooting this light has to shorten. Okay, now I can't get into all the reasons why because that would get too complicated here. You can read about it in my book, Galileo Was Wrong, or you can read about it in Geocentrism 101 or Geocentrism for Dumpskis. You can read it all there. I have it all laid out for you if you want to know the gory details. But here's what I want to tell you. If you shorten the length of the apparatus's arm, then what do you have to do? Well, if you shorten the length of the distance it's going to travel, but it still needs to get to point B from point A, how are you going to make up for that? The way you make up for it is by time dilation. In other words, you give it more time to travel. Okay? So that's where this whole idea of time dilation came from special relativity's attempt to keep the Earth moving, and it can only do it by saying we give the light beam more time to travel. So this is all willy-nilly stuff. Okay, they make it up as they go along. Why? Because they're not going to capitulate. Doesn't matter what the experiment shows or how many times it shows that the Earth is fixed in space. They don't care because that would destroy their whole aura of modern science that they have imposed upon us. They're not going to give it up. I've learned that after 20 years. Okay, they will make every excuse in the book they can. And as silly as their theories sound, saying the length is shortened. And then they all were arguing, well, how can we prove that the length was shortened? Well, maybe we can say that it looks like it was shortened, but it really wasn't shortened. Or maybe it really was shortened, but we have to say somehow that it was shortened. And they go back and forth. There's like 8 different views how they're going to explain this to the world. And they can't agree on that either. All they agree upon is, yeah, the length has to be shortened. Well, how's it going to be shortened? So one guy came along and Henrik Lorentz said, well, it was the ether that was shortening the rod. And Einstein didn't like that because ether wasn't supposed to be acting like that. They all thought ether was frictionless. Okay, so Einstein got rid of the ether and said, oh, it's just a freak of nature. This is what happens. Whenever something moves, it shortens. And so that's what they accepted. Why? Because the alternative was the Earth was fixed and we have to go kiss the feet of the Pope. Okay? That's why. This is what it's all about, folks. All right? So, and the other thing, too, is if you shorten the length, you dilate the time, what else do you have to do? Well, now you have the mass has to increase. Okay? Because now you're going to have more density because the volume of the mass is smaller. So now you're going to have more mass per unit volume. So you have to say that the mass increases per unit volume. Okay, so the length is shortened, the time is dilated, and the mass increases. All 3 of those are the repercussions or the consequences of saying that the speed of light is constant. Okay. So, but then, of course, the idea of time dilation takes on a life of its own. Time dilation. We can stretch time. You can do no such thing. Time is time, and nobody can do anything about time. Okay. That clock is ticking up in God's clock, and it's not going to change, and nobody here is going to change it. That is a fact. So all this stuff about time dilation is just a pipe dream from a guy who made it up in 1905 because he wanted to keep the earth moving so that the world didn't have to worship at the feet of the Pope. Okay, that's what it's all about. That's the reality. Okay, so don't believe in time dilation or time warp or whatever terms they want to put on it. Okay. Question from Remy. Why aren't women allowed authority and teaching over men? And do you have any scientific arguments to back it up? Scientific? I'm dealing with atheists and secularists. Well, good luck. Okay. Because if they're not going to believe the Bible and they're not going to believe the dogmas of the Catholic Church or the fathers, then forget it. Okay. Shake the dust off your feet, walk away, and let them simmer in their ignorance. Okay. You're not going to help them. So you have to first get them to agree. If I give you biblical validation, ecclesial validation, and patristic validation, will you accept it? And depending on what they say, is going to determine whether you talk to them further or not. Okay. So, like Jesus says, don't cast your pearls before swine. You only talk to people who agree with the authorities that you're going to bring forth. Okay. Now, as far as the Bible is concerned, it's crystal clear. I don't know how much clearer a doctrine can be. It's about as clear as any other important doctrine we have in Catholicism. There are like 5 passages in the New Testament alone that say women are to be under the authority of men. Okay? So 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 11 to 15 is probably the strongest one. You know, I permit no woman to teach or have authority over man. And then he gives the reason for it, St. Paul does. He says, because Adam was first formed and Eve was deceived. Okay, so there are your 2 reasons. Adam was created first. Now, you won't find that in much of the literature, okay, where people are trying to get around this. They always sort of miss that little sentence that Paul has in 1 Corinthians 2:13. Adam was first formed. That means he's in charge, regardless whether Eve committed her sin or not. Okay, that's why he gives 2 reasons. Okay, one is before they fell, that is, Adam was first formed. So before they fell into sin, Adam was already in authority over Eve. Okay, that's the part that they want to dilute or somehow, get mixed up in the mixture and we sort of forget about it. But that's the case. Okay, then Eve compounded that reason by the fact that she was deceived by the serpent and then gave her husband to eat. So there's another reason why she'll never have authority over men, because of that issue. So you see how St. Paul treats the Adam and Eve issue not as some ancient thing that happened back then that really doesn't affect us today. He reaches back over, 4,000 some odd years and brings that right to the forefront. Don't forget about this little incident back here, because it still counts as much as it counted back then. Okay? So he brings it to the forefront. And then he repeats this again, 1 Corinthians 11, saying, Adam was made first, Eve second. So there's the chain of authority: God, Christ, man, woman. So much so that a woman should put a veil on her head when she goes into worship. Of course, they've done away with that also. That's just passe, you see. That was just for the culture of that day, as the argument goes. No. The authority of man over woman has never changed and never will change. Okay. You got First Peter chapter 3, where Peter's talking about Abraham and Sarah, and says Sarah obeyed Abraham to the point that she called him Lord. Lord Abraham. And then he encourages the women of that day, 2,000 years ago, to model themselves after Sarah. Okay. You got 1 Corinthians 14, verses 33 to 38, where Paul says, I do not permit a woman to speak in the church, as in all the churches. In other words, this is a rule not just for the Corinthian church. I've given this rule everywhere in all the churches. Okay. And if she has anything to ask her husband, let her ask at home. That's pretty explicit, pretty detailed. They can't even ask a question in the congregation. Okay. No talking. Period. And then he says, and were you the ones that God made a prophet? Or was it me? Are you going to make up the rules for how worship should be conducted? Or did God speak through me? That's what he says in the rest of 1 Corinthians 14. And besides that, he said, it's also written in the law that this is the case. Okay? So there's a verse in Isaiah 28, verse 12, I think it is, where Israel's at the height of their apostasy. They're just about to be judged and sent off into captivity. And Isaiah says, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. Well, this is what happens to a society when it's degraded and starts doing self-destruction. Children are the oppressors. Look at the kids today. My gosh. And women rule over them. Okay, this is exactly what we see today. These are the signs that we're on the downward slope, the slippery slope. Okay, so yeah, the Bible's very clear. But unless this atheists and secularists are going to listen to the Bible, don't waste your time. Okay? All the fathers in total consensus, and we're talking about the big boys here: Augustine, Chrysostom, Basil, Ambrose, Athanasius, all said the same thing. And you can find all this out if you want in a book I wrote called, what is it? Something about submission, or women to be submissive to men, something like that. I forget my own title. But you can get that at robertsongenis.org. Little book about that thick, maybe less than 100 pages. And gives you all the history, all the Bible verses, all the fathers, all the encyclicals that the popes have written on this. Okay, so it's all there for you, Remy. And anyway, let's move on. Like Bobby Fischer, E. Michael Jones just very simply recognized the patterns in history, the same people involved, and was willing to name them. Yes, you can say that there, Dave. Michael's willing to name them. And not only them, but all their little peccadillos. That's one thing you will get from Michael Jones's book that you're not going to get from many other people, because they're afraid to name names and step on people's toes. Well, Michael does it all scholarly and intellectually. And look, if the guy's a homo, you need to know that. If he's conducting music, if he's composing music, if he's writing poetry, if he's creating paintings, if he's writing literature, you need to know about his private life because it all affects his artwork. Okay. Don't let anybody ever tell you that they can separate their lifestyle from their art style. That is simply not true. Okay. Especially when you get to people like Picasso, who was just blithering out all his philosophies and his love interest and unrequited love interest and all that on the canvas. Okay. He's one of the most prominent ones that we're going to bring up next week. Um, and, we'll bring up people like Leonard Bernstein, for example. Everybody's in love with Leonard Bernstein, because he's the composer of, West Side Story music and was even invited by the Kennedys to compose a mass, the music for the mass at the Kennedy Center back in 1971. And my goodness, this guy was so popular, he could, throw bubble gum on the sidewalk and nobody would say anything. I mean, it was just, um, he had the attention and the adulation of all of America. And yet we find out that at least 3 songs he plagiarized in West Side Story. And a fourth, it was so humdrum that unless the lyrics were written by somebody famous, it would have died at its own death. And that he was a homosexual, okay? And all the other ins and outs of his life that you'll need to know. And this is what you get when you read Michael Jones's book. You find out the people behind the artistry. And that's what he's good at, okay? Telling you the whys and the wheres and the hows that nobody else will, okay? But this is life, and you need someone to give you the reality of life. And that's Mr. Jones, Dr. Jones. Okay. Remy says, why isn't the West Christian anymore? Well, it happens to deal with that guy called the devil who constantly is leading us away from God. Okay. That's where it all comes from. And we listen to him. And little by little, and like the frog boiling in the pan, it gets hotter and hotter, and he just stays in there. And that's what happens when we get tempted by the devil. And we do what he bids, and then he tempts us again, and we do even more. Until you know it, we can't even recognize our nation anymore from where it began 250 some odd years ago. Okay, that's how it happens. All right, Jaberson says, what was the debate environment when you were debating with Dr. William Marshner and Pat Madrid in a Protestant place? Is it true half of those attended converted to Catholicism? Please tell us your memory. No, there were 1,500 people there. And if 750 had converted, that would have made the Los Angeles Times. But that didn't happen. There were 6 people, half a dozen, that basically converted. Now, I don't know if anybody followed up with them, but they were ready to convert to the Catholic Church. Okay, so let's not start any rumors there about the numbers. As far as the environment was, you're going to get different kinds of environments depending on what kind of Protestant churches you're going to. And I've been in a number of them debating. And sometimes they can get real persnickety. At other times, they're the most gentle, humble people on the face of the earth. Okay. Because look, they're taught the same things that we're taught about how to conduct yourself with good behavior if you're going to be a Christian. Okay. And sometimes they do it a lot better than we do. But that's what you're going to get from a good Protestant church. You're going to get people that are, circumspect, people that know the rules, people that are polite, that care, that want to know the truth. Okay. There's a lot of them out there. And that's the kind of environment we had when we were there. Okay. Now you get a few, loudmouths here and there. You're always going to get that in some crowd. Um, and as a matter of fact, what most Protestant churches do, where I've debated, and I've debated probably, oh gosh, over 30 debates in 30 years, they tell them, don't clap for your side if they make a good point that you think is a good point. Don't clap. So they're basically as silent, you can hear a pin drop in the auditorium while the debate's going on. Okay. So that was pretty much what we had back in California, and that 1995 was when that debate took place. And I do notice that when you make a good point, they get real quiet. Okay. And you've gained their respect. It takes a little doing, but you've got to know how they approach scripture. And once you know that, you can use that same methodology and show them a point using the same logic that they would use. And when you do that, you've got their respect. And once that happens, the whole tone of the debate changes. And that's what I noticed in this debate. It wasn't, they knew from the get-go that it wasn't going to be a slam dunk for them. That they had three smart guys there and who knew their Catholic faith and who knew the scripture. And there wasn't going to be any shenanigans going on here. Okay. This is going to be a fight to the death. And that's the way I remember it. The only guy there that I thought was a little testy was Robert Godfrey. And he was a Dutch Calvinist, and usually they are a little testy. Other than that, the other two guys, Rod Rosenblatt and Michael Horton, were very gentlemanly. All right, let me go on. Some Protestant wrote this to me. Can you comment on it? Many early fathers, such as Clement of Rome, Marius Victorinus, John Chrysostom, Ambrosiaster, Jerome Bede, all taught justification by faith alone and believed that works prove the authenticity of a person's faith but had no merit and did not justify. By the Council of Trent, they would be condemned. This is all false, okay? And I have a section in my book, Not by Faith Alone, that deals with the fathers that did use the phrase faith alone, okay? But they were using it in a totally different context than what Protestants use it today, okay? Protestants already have their idea of forensic justification in view when they talk about faith alone. And even then, they can't agree on whether regeneration comes before faith or faith comes before regeneration. They can't agree whether faith itself might be a work or it's not a work. You know, they go back and forth on all these terms themselves. So the phrase faith alone is a not something that was coined by the Protestants. Okay. It was a phrase that even some fathers used because there were some people in the day who were thinking that they didn't need faith, they just could do works and that would be enough. Okay. So we had this idea that if you were going to use faith alone, you would use it against those who thought that works by themselves would merit something with God. Now, even the Catholics are adamant that works by themselves do nothing for you. Okay. Why? Well, because the relationship with God that Paul tries to instill in them is not a legal one. And this is where we got to get away from this whole forensic idea of justification from the Protestants. It's not a legal relationship. It is a personal relationship. And in a personal relationship, like a marriage, for example, what's required? The husband and the wife need to trust each other, number one. Second, But just as important, they need to work for each other. Because the wife can say, oh, honey, I love you so much, but I'm not going to cook your dinner. I'm not going to go shopping. I'm not going to do anything. Okay? And the husband can do the same. So what does it take in that kind of personal relationship? It takes work and it takes trust, and they have to continue. The same with salvation. You're talking not about some robot in the sky who's unaffected by your disposition. He is wholly affected by it. That's why he is a personal God, not just a God. He is personal, unlike the Roman gods and the Greek gods and the Zoroastrians and especially the Muslims, who don't have any concept of a personal God. But the Christian God is a personal God and needs to be related to personally. And that's why both faith and works are needed. Now, even though some of these fathers used faith alone, they did not, by any stretch of the imagination, do what you say in the second part, is that they believed that works were just to authenticate your faith. None of them say that, okay? And I have all their quotes. So this is an instance where somebody gets a funny idea in their head that because they see the phrase faith alone, that somehow that equates to what Martin Luther and John Calvin were teaching. And that is simply not true. The only way you're going to find this out, the details, again, are in my book, Not by Faith Alone. I think it's Appendix 10, where I deal with all the fathers that use that phrase and in what context they use it. Okay? One of the guys that made a big deal about this is the Protestant named Buchanan. I have his book, and I critique that as well. But that's where you're going to find out the details of this, okay? So get Not by Faith Alone. I think it's Appendix 10, okay? All right. I'm going to have to turn on my fan here, if you don't mind. Okay. What are your thoughts on feminism, and how do you think its origins came about? And is feminism really about equality between men and women? Feminism is what I would call the Eve syndrome, okay? Where Eve is told that she is under the authority of her husband from the beginning and didn't much like that. That's one of the reasons why she might have wanted to become a god. Because if I'm a god, then I'm equal to Adam, who's going to become a god, and there is no submission required. Okay? And I think reading between the lines in the story of Adam and Eve, the whole idea about being fruitful and multiplying might not have been Eve's cup of tea, because that takes work. And there might have been a little pain involved, because in her punishment it says your pain will increase, okay? Which implies that there was already pain involved, maybe not much pain, but still. And, I don't like that either. So, yeah, becoming a god fixes all those problems, doesn't it? That could very well be the motivation behind Eve's acceptance of the devil's little dissertation on why God isn't who he says he is. Okay? Because the devil said to her, he knows that when you eat the apple, you're going to become just like him. And that's competition. So he's holding something back from you. Okay? So all these thoughts are floating in her head, but that's where it all comes from. Okay? Is the Eve syndrome. I don't like God's plan. I don't like being under the authority of a man. Well, look, both of you can't be in authority. Okay? One is, one isn't. That's just the way it is. And that's the only way society is going to grow healthily. You get women competing against men and sharing authority, however possible that is, or Any other, silly notion they've come up with today, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. Okay. That's where it comes from. And when the church loses her moorings, this is the first thing that goes. Women begin to assert themselves and try to put themselves at the top of society, make themselves better than men, demand more authority and respect than men, will take the jobs away from men, and it goes on and on and on. Okay? So when you see a society crumble, what did Isaiah tell us, as I said earlier tonight? Children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. Isaiah 3, verse 12. And that was when the society was deteriorating. Okay? So unless you can accept that men are in charge, and there's a reason for that, and God's not just trying to be an ogre, he's trying to protect society. And men are the best to do that, not women. And if you buck that, then your society is going to fall apart. That's just the case. And we've seen that over and over again. Okay? So, moving on. What's the best scientific proof that God exists? How sure are we that he exists at the scale 1 to 10? Do Muslim Christians worship same creator? All right. Paul's argument in Romans chapter 1 is very simple. Anybody who fools himself into thinking that this complicated world, as big as it is and as complex as it is, and we know that even more today with our telescopes and microscopes and oscilloscopes, that it's even more complex than we have ever imagined. Anybody who thinks that this just popped into existence by himself is a fool. Okay? That's Paul's argument, basically. And that's how we know God exists, because we know intuitively that nothing that we see in this world could come about by itself. There must be a someone greater than all of it to put it there. Okay? And logic tells us that he has no beginning. Because if he has a beginning, then he's finite, just as the creation is. So he has to be infinite. It's just like 1 + 1 = 2, and 2 + 2 = 4. If you use the logic, this is where you're going to end up. Okay? That's Paul's argument. And we need to go no further. Because if they say, oh, well, it just popped into existence by itself, then he's a fool. And then you walk away. Let him simmer in his own ignorance. And maybe sooner or later he might, come to realize that he was a fool. Okay? So that's how you deal with it. All right, Duke. His question is, why do you believe some people receive powerful road to Damascus experiences and others don't? If God wants all to be saved, then why doesn't he give everyone an experience like Paul's? Well, look, he did give a lot of experiences like Paul's. Okay? He cured people. He exorcised demons. He raised people from the dead right in front of the Pharisees. And you know what they said? He does these by the power of Beelzebub, the chief demon. Okay? So it doesn't always work that way. Where if you do a miracle, then somebody's going to believe. A lot of times it does work that way, but a lot of times it doesn't. There's no guarantee. It all depends on the free will of the person. Okay? And that's one thing God has given to every man, a free will. Look, some people don't want to be holy. Okay? Some people don't like leading a restricted life that doesn't allow them to do this or that or the other thing. They just don't like our lifestyle. Okay? They hate being holy. And so you can perform a miracle in front of them, and that's not going to do anything. It's just going to convince them more that they don't want your lifestyle. Okay? So God, of course, is all-knowing. He knows what experience someone needs or what that experience is going to do after he becomes saved. Like for St. Paul, this guy was adamant against Christianity. He was killing Christians. But God knew something about Paul, that once he was put in the right direction, this guy would be the best evangelist the world has ever seen, because he had it in his heart. So all he needed was a Damascus Road experience to say, Paul, you're going in the wrong direction. And to enforce it, I'm going to make you blind for 3 days. So you know it came from heaven. And you know that it was really me speaking to you. And once Paul saw that, the guy said, oh my gosh, where have I been all my life? And he was ready to go out there. And he did his evangelization till the day he died. And he died by getting his head chopped off in Rome. Okay, so that God knew that about him. He knew that he had a free will, Paul did, but God knew that if he gave him this experience, this would be what Paul needed. As opposed to the Pharisees, where Jesus could speak to them. You know, I mean, that's what happened when Jesus was baptized. God spoke from heaven. This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. And the Pharisees were all there. But did it affect it? No. They heard the voice. Okay, but they'll make up some excuse. So it can go either way. Okay. All right. Question: is watching or training in a sport like boxing a sin? I wouldn't call it a sin, but I would call it dangerous. Okay. And anything that's dangerous, you're going to have to, use your logic and figure out whether this is what you want to do with your life. You can get brain damage. You can, all kinds of things. Of course, that's true with a lot of sports: football, basketball, baseball, hockey, you name it. They all have a degree of danger in them. So you have to be, wise in what you do. But it's not a sin to engage in a sport. All right. All right. Okay, somebody said it was Skinwalker Ranch. Okay. Question: the British did studies if they needed to adjust trajectory shooting long distance naval shots sideways to Earth's rotation. If on a planet that rotates, would you notice it trying to take a step? John, you need to get your grammar right here. I can hardly understand. Fortunately, I know something about what you're talking about, but you haven't stated it correctly, so I'm not quite sure what you're asking. If you are asking that the British studies of a bullet or a bomb, let's say that you have two ships in the sea, okay, that are a mile apart, and one wants to shoot a trajectory or a missile through the air to get to the other ship, to hit a certain spot on that ship. What is he going to have to take into account in order to make that missile hit the ship in the place it should hit? Well, he has to take into account the Coriolis force. Okay. The Coriolis force is going to make the missile go off to the right a little bit. Okay, so they have to adjust for that. and put the, you know, the launcher to the left a little bit. So by the time the missile gets to the boat, it hits right where they want it to hit. Okay. And they've measured the Coriolis force, so they know how strong it is and how it's going to affect a projectile that goes a certain distance. And the longer it goes that distance, the more the Coriolis force is going to affect it. So if that's what you're talking about, that's what happens. But see, there's two theories on the origin of the Coriolis force. The heliocentric theory claims that it's just a matter of motion because the Earth is rotating west to east. And if that's the case, then a projectile is going to go off west to east a little bit, depending on how fast it's going and the distance it's going. Whereas the geocentric system says, no, the Earth isn't moving. It's the universe that's moving around the Earth, that because of the angular momentum of the universe, it creates actual Coriolis force. And that force is real, and it's going to affect anything that is moving on the Earth that's trying to move in a straight line. And it's going to make that line curved. Okay. We see evidence of this in hurricanes. Okay. And because the Earth is right smack in the center of mass of the universe, that means the northern hemisphere is going to have a different direction to the Coriolis force than the southern hemisphere. And that's why you'll see hurricanes go counterclockwise in the north and clockwise in the south. Okay. Because the Earth's equator is right at the universal equator. Okay. And that's how the Coriolis force works. Okay. Question from CMAC. What's with Church of Latter-day Saints? Is it satanic? I just watched the Netflix series about Laurie Vallow. Why are there so many weird, evil stories coming from that religion? Because they are weird. That's why. Simple. I mean, if you read the writings of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, first of all, both of these guys were serial adulterers. Okay. And they tried to cover it up by having multiple wives. Okay. But they were committing serial adultery on the first wives that they had, having sex with women they weren't married to. Okay. Nobody knows about this because, you know, the Mormon church is big today. You know, they own Coca-Cola and the Marriott Hotel, and they make a lot of money, and all this is hush-hush. Okay. But these are weird people. That's why. Now, of course, somebody will say, well, look at Donny Osmond and Marie Osmond. Weren't they good? Yeah, like a lot of religions, they have a sense of morality. If they didn't, they wouldn't be able to exist because they'd be killing each other. Okay, so yeah, morality works for them. Works for a lot of people, a lot of organizations. You have to have a code. Even thieves have a code, right? So you have to have it. But it doesn't mean you can't be weird. You know, Joseph Smith wrote about America having all these cities and towns and places that he gave his own names to, run by people that never existed, and cities and towns that never existed. He made it up all in his head. So this guy was a loony bin from the start. Okay, and he got a bunch of people together and said, you know, we're being persecuted by all these other religions. Let's go make our home in Utah, and voila, this is what you get. Okay, so yeah, looking across the world, this is not unusual. Look at how many religions there are across the world, because everybody, if you don't have the truth, you're going to make up your own truth. And then you're going to get a following because you can convince people, you know, you're like a magician. You've got the art of gab, and you can talk your way out of a paper bag, and people listen to you who don't know any better. They want somebody to follow because they don't know what to do, how to make the decisions. And You got a marriage made in heaven, you see. It happens all the time. So it doesn't surprise me that groups like this are all over the world. All right, question from Will says, how is your new commentary coming along? Are you almost done with Luke and Acts? I have all the other commentary volumes and have to admit that there is nothing like it on the Catholic market. Well, that is true there, Will. That's what I said when I advertised it, right? Nothing like it on the Catholic market. And it's one of a kind. As far as Luke and Acts, I'm still working on it. The problem is a lot of other stuff gets in the way, and I have to tend to it. And like writing those 2 reviews for Michael Jones, it took about a month. So that was a month I couldn't apply to Luke and Acts to get them finished. But I'm back in the saddle now, trying to get them done. And let me see, what is it, September? Gosh, it probably won't be till next year, early next year, that I get it done. So sorry about that, but I can, only run on my little rubber, conveyor belt just so fast. Plus, I'm getting a lot older, and I can't spend as much time in concentration because it takes a very intense amount of concentration. And I find myself getting more tired and getting headaches and stuff like that. So I am trying my best to get more sleep and take my vitamins. But it's a lot harder than it was 20 years ago, that is for sure. So pray for me, Will, if you would, that I can maintain my energy and my verve to get this done. Okay. Question: I can't stand the permanent diaconate, and our diocese ordains to priests about 10 to 1 a year. What's your opinion of permanent diaconate's effect on vocations or the liturgy in general? Flip, I don't know. It depends on what diocese you're in. I would say that the reason they're in a permanent diaconate is because that's what they want to do. They're married and they can't become priests, usually. Okay. If they're single and they're a permanent diaconate, there's probably a reason for that. They don't want to take on the responsibilities of a priest. They just want to help. Okay. So, I think there should be, like you, I think what you're saying is there probably should be more of a push for permanent deacons to actually get ordained, because we sure do need the priests. And a permanent diaconate, he's already been through the ropes, so he knows what it takes. And you're usually older gentlemen, which could be another reason why they don't want it, because they're getting too old. With priests, you're going to need somebody, middle-aged or younger, because it takes a lot, especially these days where you don't have a lot of help. You have one priest running the parish sometimes, if that. And so it's going to take a lot of energy to do that. And, you know how that goes. Okay. All right, so KH says, in a study from CE4 Research Group, they have documented over 400 cases of alien abduction, and the phenomena ceased by the name and authority of the name of Jesus. Yes, I've read about those too. So what does that prove to us? Well, exactly what I said before. A lot of these alien abduction cases are demon-possessed people, and they need an exorcism, okay? Now, look, if you're predisposed to accepting the existence of aliens, what better way for the devil to come to you than as an alien? That's what I would do if I were the devil. I'd come to you as an alien, you know? All right. Remy says there are physiological and psychological reasons that an honest scientist will admit to, though most would be far too afraid to say it now. Ultimately, it is what God has revealed. All right, I'm not sure what you're applying that to here, Walmart. Okay. Brian Hartney says, are we not living under the firmament? Is the earth enclosed? Is that not what the Bible says? Could aliens not be the fallen ones? No, aliens are not the fallen ones. We are the fallen ones and the angels. That's all there is. Angels and us and God. Yes, we are living under the firmament because the firmament is the heavens. That's what Genesis 1:8 says. The firmament is the heavens. And we're living under it, aren't we? Okay. So the earth is not enclosed in the sense that there's some solid dome over the earth, if that's what you're getting at. Okay. That's just a misinterpretation of Genesis chapter 1. The firmament is the heavens, as far out as the heavens go to the edge of the universe. And we're all under it because why? Because we're in the center. That's why. Okay. All right. Just tuned in. Happy that E. Michael Jordan is coming on your show. Yes, so am I. All right. Matt Fradd. Yes, that's the guy. Good. Thank you for that. I think he's Australian, isn't he? Something like that. He's got that accent. Okay. Looking for a question here. A lot of comments. All right. Question from Gateway. Can you demonstrate the specific math for a geostationary satellite in a geocentric system with a specific mass and distance? Yes, we can do that. You know, what we're going to do is we're going to take F equals ma and we're going to add the inertial forces to it. Centrifugal, Coriolis, and Euler. That's all you have to use. Then all you need after that is the distance the satellite is from the equator, which is, you know, if you're going to get a geostationary satellite, it's going to be 22,400 miles in altitude. And at that altitude, the universe is rotating 7,000 miles per hour. Okay. Then you're going to get the gravity, escape gravity. I'm sorry, the escape velocity in the equation. And then you're going to add in F equals ma plus the inertial forces. That's what the equation would be. Okay. The heliocentric view is going to use F equals ma, and then they're going to write in by hand what the centrifugal, Coriolis, and Euler forces are going to be, because it's not in Newton's equation. Okay. And then instead of the universe going 7,000 miles per hour, they have to have that satellite going 7,000 miles per hour to keep up with the rotating Earth that's going 1,040 miles per hour at the equator. Okay, so you plug all those figures in and you can come up with the equation for both systems. It's no big deal. James White, destroyed by the Book of James. Very good, Germanicus. So Seamus Crawford comes in and says, to be fair, James White is destroyed by every book, even secular books. Poor James. It must be hard for him too, because his sister converted to Catholicism, what, about 15 years ago or more? And she's remained a Catholic ever since. That just might get to his crawl. The things he tried to say to minimize that were just amazing. But his own sister became a Catholic. And I must say, she doesn't have 10% of the knowledge that James White has. Okay. All right. Question. Have you heard of the helical engine invented by David Burns? Supposedly it will make it possible to travel close to the speed of light. Your thoughts? Well, I'd have to see it first, so I don't know about it. Let me write that down. I hope I can find it on the internet, so I will take a look. Okay. Question, can a Christian, David Burns, I forgot to write that down. Okay. Can a Christian woman become ruler of a country like president, prime minister? No, she would not be allowed to do that. Okay. I mean, if Paul's dogma is going to mean anything, it means that a woman can't be a ruler of a country. Okay. Because there's three areas of authority: the family, the church, and the government. Okay. So Paul wouldn't be saying, oh, well, the rule against women ruling only applies to the family and the church, but she's free to do so in the government. No, they would apply, his rule would apply to all three areas. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a woman who claims to be a Christian, like Queen Elizabeth, for example. You know, she's an Anglican Christian, doesn't go by what the Catholic Church says. So, yeah, there's going to be people who claim to be Christians who are rulers of countries. But if you're asking me if St. Paul would allow a Christian woman to become a ruler of a country, the answer would be flat no. Okay. All right. Oscar says, can we predict the way the moon moves using Newton's physics in a Tychonic model, or do we need to resort to Luka Popov physics using Newton plus matched Mach? You mean Mach plus Mach to get it right? Well, yeah, you do. Newton's F equals ma can't even get a space probe to go where they want it to go. Okay. They can't even get the GPS satellites to go where they want them to go just using F equals ma. They have to add in the inertial forces: Coriolis, centrifugal, and Euler. Okay? Every single probe, satellite, spaceship, whatever they send up, they have to add in these inertial forces, or it ain't going to get where they want it to go. That's just a fact. And you can find this on Wikipedia. They all know it. Okay, so what does that mean in the long run? Well, it means there's a flaw in the Newtonian system. That's what it means. Okay, and what system does have the inertial forces as an integral part of its system? The geocentric system. Okay, because a rotating universe will create these three forces. So we don't have to add them into the equations because we already have them in our equations. Okay, so yeah, I mean, it would apply to the moon also. Anything that revolves around another object, yeah, you're going to have the inertial forces involved. Okay, but at least ours are real. The Newtonian systems are made up. Okay, and that's a flaw. Even Einstein said that's the defect in Newtonian mechanics. and there's no way to fix it. Okay, so it tells us that's not the true system. It comes close, but it's not the true system. Okay, all right. Okay, so somebody here is saying, Lighten Lad, yes, it did away with the ceremonial law, but not the moral law. You can find the catechism entry regarding the 10 commandments. All right, I'm going to comment on that because that's not exactly true. And don't get all jumpy here, okay? Because I'll come right back to where you are in a second, but I need to get there the right way. So what you're saying here is that the New Testament covenant did away with the ceremonial law, but not the moral law. No, that's false. It did away with both, okay? Anything in the Mosaic law, whether it's ceremonial, civil, or moral, was revoked, okay? That's why we could change the 10 Commandment, regarding the Sabbath day, to not worship on the seventh day, okay? Because if the moral law was still in legal jurisdiction over us from Moses, we'd have to obey the seventh day, okay? So the whole shebang, all of the Mosaic law was rescinded, revoked, nullified, okay? Got to get that clear. So why did the 10 Commandments appear in the Catechism? Here's why. Because now the church, the New Testament church in its own covenant, the new covenant, is able to take any law it wants from the Old Testament, whether it's Mosaic or Noachic or Abrahamic or whoever. It can take any law it wants that's good for the New Testament church. And one good guideline of that is the 10 Commandments. Why? Because who wants to argue with the 10 Commandments? Worship God and God only. Don't take God's name in vain. Worship him. Honor your mother and father. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't covet. Who would argue against those? They're very needful laws. So the New Testament incorporated those laws minus the seventh-day Sabbath, because it had the prerogative to do so, and put them into the new covenant, okay? But most of the civil laws, most of the ceremonial laws were not put into the new covenant. Why? Because they were fulfilled. They have really no purpose anymore, okay? Some of the civil laws do, like Paul himself, when he was talking about the wages that were due him from the Corinthians for preaching to them the gospel. He said, doesn't the law itself say, don't muzzle the ox that treads the corn? 1 Corinthians 9:18, is it? Right around there. Okay. So what is Paul doing? What he's doing is he's getting the principle that was taught in the Mosaic law, and he's applying it spiritually to his situation in the New Testament with the Corinthians. And he can do so, okay? Because every law that was in the Mosaic covenant was put there for a reason. And sometimes those reasons were very moral, very ethical, and the New Testament church would love to use them. And so she can adopt them however way she wishes, okay? One of them that she was adamant that she wasn't going to use is circumcision, because that had a whole different meaning in the Old Testament than what it would have in the New. So that all evolved into baptism, okay? And so that's where that ceremonial law went. It went to baptism, okay? I mean, it was a good idea to have a marker, an identity marker for your people, something that kept them all together, something that they could look to for their identity as opposed to another group, That whole idea was good. And that's what baptism still does today. Okay. But we don't obey the ceremonial law of circumcision because the whole Old Testament was alleviated, it was rescinded. Okay. Yeah, that's about so. In other words, that's why the Ten Commandments appear in the Catechism. Let me just give you an illustration to help you understand this. The United States Constitution. You hear everybody saying, well, it's not in the Constitution. So we go by the Constitution, right? That's our Bible as a nation, so to speak. Okay. But where do most of those ideas come from that are in the Constitution? Well, a lot of them come from English law. Okay. A lot of them come from the Magna Carta that was used in the early medieval period. Great document, Magna Carta. Okay. So we take ideas from the Magna Carta, and put them in the U.S. Constitution. Okay. That's like the church taking laws and ethical principles from the Mosaic covenant and putting them into the new covenant. Okay. But just like our authority is not the Magna Carta, it is the U.S. Constitution. Our authority is the New Testament covenant, not the Mosaic covenant. So if you say, well, the new covenant didn't do away with the moral law, well, that's implying or directly saying that the Mosaic law still exists. Okay? It doesn't. It exists in letter. We can read it, what they did back then, but it doesn't apply legally today. Okay? The only moral laws that apply legally are the ones that the church has adopted, and they are all explicated in the Catechism. And that's why we obey them. Okay? All right. Got a few more minutes left. See if we can knock off the rest of these questions. Question. The other day, the mass reading in the New Order was Proverbs 3:27-34 about God's curse on the wicked and blessings on the righteous. I sat there thinking that just isn't true. How do I reconcile? Well, why don't you think it's true? I mean, that's a major theme in the whole Bible. Okay. That God curses the wicked and blesses the righteous. So I don't know where you're getting this notion that somehow that's just odd. Okay, so okay, God says he despises the wicked. Read the book of Sirach, it'll tell you all the things God does to the wicked sooner or later. And just the opposite for the righteous. So I just don't understand where your question's coming from. Okay, thank you, Germanicus, for sending that link. Okay, somebody says, Victoria says, can you explain what mass intentions are and how it works? Okay, so it's just like prayer. You know, if you want something God to do for you that's out of your power, you pray to him, right? Okay, so people will use the Mass as their prayer because the Mass is very powerful. It's like praying to the Blessed Virgin. Okay, she's more powerful in her intercession than you might be in your own prayer. So we call upon her, or some of the other saints. Okay, so you ask the church if they will accept your intention to apply the Mass to your special intention. Now, you have to pay for it. It's nominal, but this is part of the sacrifice that you give to God for having the church give you a Mass intention. Sometimes when you're at Mass, you'll either at the beginning of the Mass or at the end of the Mass, they'll say, this Mass was offered up by the intention of, or for the intentions of John Smith. Okay. Most of the time, John Smith has died. He was a parishioner of the church. And now we want to pray for him to make sure that if he went to purgatory, he gets out of there a lot faster with our prayers than he would have otherwise. Okay. Usually that's what a Mass intention is for, usually because someone has died in the church. It could be someone also who's very sick, and someone will want to get a Mass intention said for their recovery. Okay, that's also possible. Okay. All right. Germanicus says, is it actually proper to call the Earth, planet Earth, as a geocentrist, since the word comes from the Greek word that means traveler, and that the Earth, and that can't be since the Earth is stationary? Yes, you don't call the Earth a planet. Okay, never, 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 never. Question: in Exodus 16, a vase of special grain manna is received, or is reserved or kept as testimony for generations, a non-expiring food. So fascinating. Where is it? What do you think about that? Yeah, for that time, I don't think they still exist today, if that's what you're implying by your question. Okay. That would be highly unusual. So the sun is not stationary. That is correct. The sun moves with the universe around the Earth every day. That's called the geocentric system. If you want to know any more about it, Zermaldo, you can go to robertsongenis.org. I suggest you get Geocentrism 101 or Geocentrism for Dumpskis, and it'll tell you the whole story. All right, we got a minute left. Hello, Dr. Sungenis. As I understand, it's true to say that general relativity and special relativity are contradictory and incompatible. Is that the case? Yes, that would be the case. Okay, looks like we're done. I almost got through all of the questions here. Will God always make you pay the consequences of sin in this life, even if I have honestly repented? Yes. It's either going to be this life or the next life. Okay, that's what purgatory is all about. But what does that do for you, Shannon? It makes you not want to sin all the more, right? If you know there's no free lunch, you're going to be a lot more careful about your sin, right? Right. Okay. All right, folks, I'm going. Thank you so much for coming aboard today, and hope you can come next week when Michael Jones will be here to discuss his book, Dangers of Beauty. And if you can stop along at robertsongenis.org and give a generous donation to help us keep things going around here, that would be very much appreciated. I know money's tight today, but we're not asking for much. Just let me know you're there and you care. And each of you, if each of you do that, it will multiply greatly and allow us to keep moving. You can also become a monthly donor. Just press a couple of buttons and you're there. $5, $10, $15 a month would help us very much. So if you're getting a lot out of this 2-hour session per week, let me know. Okay. And that would be the best way to let me know. All right. God love you. Take care. Keep away from sin. Study the church catechism, study the Bible, study the fathers, study the saints, and keep praying.